Welcome to Crimes and Mysteries. Today we're going to explore the case of one of the most enigmatic and brutal serial killers in history, Jack the Ripper. In 1888, on the streets of Whitechapel in London, the scene of brutal crimes that shocked the world, to this day the identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery. Get ready to meet the victims, theories and main suspects surrounding this terrifying case. Between August and November 1888, 5 women were brutally murdered in Whitechapel. They are known as the canonical victims of Jack the Ripper. The first victim found on August 31, 1888 was Mary Ann Nichols, found with deep cuts to her throat and mutilations to her abdomen. The graphic details of the crime marked the beginning of the Whitechapel nightmare. Found dead on September 8, she was the second victim, Annie Chapman, who also suffered severe mutilations to her abdomen and even had her internal organs removed. The precision of the cuts suggested some medical knowledge, leading to the first theory that the killer might have been a doctor or a butcher. On September 30, 1888, the victim was Elizabeth Stride. Unlike the other victims, Elizabeth was not mutilated in the abdomen, which led many to believe that the killer was interrupted before finishing his attack. Murdered on the same night as Elizabeth Stride, on September 30, was Catherine Eddowes. Catherine suffered deep facial and abdominal mutilations, features that increased the cruelty and public panic. On November 9, 1888, considered the last canonic victim, Mary Jane Kelly was murdered. Mary Jane suffered the most severe mutilation of all, being practically disfigured. The scene of her murder was one of the most brutal, shocking even the investigators. These macabre deaths have sparked a wave of theories and suspicions. Who was the person behind these crimes? To better understand the horrors committed by Jack the Ripper, let's explore the places where his brutal crimes took place. In 1888, the streets of Whitechapel were dark, narrow and dangerous, a perfect setting for a killer to act without being noticed. Let's see what these areas were like at the time of the murders and how they have changed over the years. Bucks Row, now known as Durward Street, the place where Mary Ann Nichols was found in 1888. Bucks Row was a dark, narrow street with poor lighting and industrial buildings. It was surrounded by slums and housed many low-income people. A desolate environment, perfect for an unnoticed attack. Now known as Durward Street, the area has undergone many changes, with new residential buildings and a school nearby. However, some historic buildings remain and the streets are now much better lit and urbanized. 29 Hanbury Street, where Annie Chapman was murdered. Hanbury Street was lined with residences divided into small apartments with tenements as common areas. Number 29 was a very modest residence, in a narrow alley and without any security system. The number 29 no longer exists. The street is now dominated by modern buildings, shops and businesses. The old buildings have been demolished, but Hanbury Street still retains some traces of Victorian London in the surrounding area. Berner Street, now Enriquez Street, where Elizabeth Stride was found. Berner Street was a busy street with small shops, bars and a few hostel houses. Elizabeth was murdered in the courtyard of a social club, the International Working Men's Educational Club, a place for political and social meetings. The street has been renamed Enriquez Street. The site of the social club has now been replaced by new residential buildings, but the area still has its original layout. Some of the old brick buildings and alleys maintain their historic appearance. Mitre Square, where Catherine Eddowes was murdered. Mitre Square was a small, secluded cobblestone courtyard surrounded by industrial and office buildings, with minimal lighting, providing an ideal setting for an attack. Today Mitre Square is part of a renovated commercial area, with modern office buildings surrounding it. The square still preserves some traces of the past, such as the layout of the floor, but the atmosphere is much more urban and guarded. 13 Miller's Court, where Mary Jane Kelly was murdered. Miller's Court was a small passage of cramped tenements, without any public lighting. It was a secluded space at the bottom of Dorset Street, known for housing immigrant workers and low-income people. Miller's Court and Dorset Street were demolished and replaced with modern commercial buildings. The original location is now part of a complex of offices and residential buildings, and there is little left of the somber atmosphere that once characterized the area. These areas have changed dramatically over the years, but there are still guided tours that recreate the scenes of 1888, with old photos and detailed stories. Theories about Jack the Ripper have multiplied since the investigation began. Some of them stand out, creating a true historical mystery. Medical knowledge theory. Many believe that Jack the Ripper had medical knowledge due to the accuracy of the mutilations. This has led to the hypothesis that he could have been a frustrated doctor or surgeon. Theory 2 is that of the local butcher. The theory is that the killer could be a butcher familiar with knives and precise cuts, someone who could go unnoticed on the streets of Whitechapel. Theory 3. Insanity. Some believe that the killer suffered from a serious mental condition, which would explain the sadism and brutality of the attacks. It is believed that the crimes could have a ritual component resulting from a deeply affected mind. Theory 4. Conspiracies of the British government or the royal family. One of the most controversial theories suggests that Jack the Ripper was part of British high society, possibly even the royal family. Some believe the crimes were covered up by the government to protect influential figures. Theory 5. More recently, the theory appeared that Jack the Ripper could be a woman. Jane the Ripper, that the killer could have been a midwife or a woman who worked with anatomy. Some speculate that the killer could have been a woman with a hatred for prostitutes, either out of jealousy or warped morality. Another possibility raised is that she could be a vengeful former prostitute. Along with the theories, several suspects have also emerged over the years. Here are the most famous ones. Suspect number 1, Montague John Druitt, a lawyer and professor, was said by some to have erratic behavior. He was found dead in December 1888, shortly after Jack the Ripper's last crime. This led some to believe that he was the killer, ending the crimes with his death. Suspect number 2, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber, who lived in Whitechapel and had a history of mental problems. He was admitted to an asylum shortly after the crimes, and the police considered him one of the main suspects. Suspect number 3, Michael Ostrog, a known criminal but with no conclusive evidence linking him to the crimes, was suspected by police due to his history of violence and erratic behavior. Suspect number 4, Sir William Gull, Queen Victoria's physician. Gull was linked to the case due to the theory that the royal family could be involved. This theory has been widely popularized in books and films but lacks evidence. Suspect number 5, James Maybrick, a Liverpool businessman whose possible connection to the crimes emerged after the alleged diary of Jack the Ripper came to light in 1992. The diary detailed the crimes, but the authenticity of the evidence is widely questioned. Suspect number 6, Mary Piercy. A suspect often associated with the Jane the Ripper theory is Mary Piercy, who was convicted in 1890 of the brutal murder of her lover's wife and child. Her modus operandi was extremely violent, leading some to question whether she could have been responsible for the Whitechapel murders. Although numerous investigations have been carried out and many suspects have been identified, the identity of Jack or Jane the Ripper remains a mystery. To this day, historians, detectives and crime enthusiasts try to decipher clues left in the dark alleys of Whitechapel. But will we ever have answers? Follow Crimes and Mysteries for more fascinating episodes, and remember, every mystery has a story, but not always an answer.